Welcome, everyone. I'm Anna Hargrave with the Greater Washington Community Foundation. I'm so excited to have you all join us today. We have a fantastic panel lined up to talk about children's trust accounts. What are they and how they have been such a successful tool to increase economic mobility? So today's conversation is the second event in our webinar series called In Pursuit of Economic Justice, where we bring together experts to help inform and educate our partners on some of the most promising interventions to help close the racial wealth gap. We have so much to discuss today, but before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to give just a bit of background. So children's trust accounts are set up for young children to redeem when they graduate high school for uses in education, home ownership, entrepreneurship, or simply to build individual savings. Children's trust accounts have a proven track record in many communities across the U.S. In fact, currently there are over 109 children's trust account programs operating in 36 states and Washington, D.C., with nearly 1 million children enrolled. So expanding the possibilities, not just for one, but an entire group of children will help move forward our vision of closing the racial wealth gap across Greater Washington. So the Community Foundation is embarking on a children's trust account pilot program for kindergarten students in our region. We're planning to establish accounts for all the students enrolled in kindergarten in 2 elementary schools, one in Prince George's County and one in Montgomery County. The Community Foundation will seed all the accounts for those kids entering kindergarten for the next 2 years as well. So the idea is each child will receive an initial deposit of $1,000 and up to $1,000 each year from grades 1 through 12. And so as these funds grow over time, there's also the potential for families, additional public and private contributions, and of course it'll all grow, hopefully grow under the while they're invested through the Community Foundation. I should note the program just differs from traditional children's savings account programs that are typically restricted just to education and training purposes. We want these young people to be able to start their lives with the flexibility to pursue their dreams in any direction that they want to go. I'll note that the pilot programs we're hoping to start this spring, and we will have some more details on those as soon as it becomes available. I did also want to clarify that you might have heard the term baby bonds, which are similar to trust accounts in that they have greater flexibility of use, but they differ in terms of the back-end financing structure, typically supported by government. And in any case, we're planning to work with local partners to help with family engagement, financial literacy, and other supports to help make sure these kids get what they need to thrive. So there's no reason to get hung up on terminology, savings, trust, baby bonds, but to really focus on the spirit of the program, which is providing significant resources for young people from economically disadvantaged communities and giving them the jumpstart they need to be successful for their adult lives. I'd now like to kick it over to my colleague, Kim R. Ford, who will be moderating today's discussion. Kim is an independent consultant working with the Community Foundation and supporting our work in developing children's trust accounts. And we are very lucky to have her guidance and expertise. Over to you, Kim.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for that, Anna. And thank you to the Greater Washington Community Foundation under the leadership of CEO Tonya Wellens for investing in this amazing, amazing work. I mean, again, $1,000 seed plus up to $1,000 every year through high school graduation. It's phenomenal. It's exciting. I know everyone is reaching for their reactions to send, hand claps and boom pows, because this is really, really exciting. Equally as exciting is our panelists. Oh my goodness, these are national experts in this work, and we are going to hear from them about what they have seen across the country and on the ground. So excited to welcome Leila Bozorg, who is the Chief of Strategy and Policy at NYC Kids Rise, where she is helping to build a universal wealth building platform for New York City public school students, families, and neighborhoods. Through the NYC Kids Rise Save for College program, New York City public school students now have a financial asset for their educational futures starting in kindergarten, and communities across the city have an additional tool to support their children's educational and economic success. Welcome, Leila. Would also like to introduce Dr. William Elliott. who prefers to go by Willie, and we're going to respect that, who is a leading researcher in the fields of college savings accounts, college debt, and wealth inequality. Dr. Elliott is serving programs across the nation and currently conducting research in Oakland with the Oakland Promise in California, Prosperity Kids in New Mexico, K2C in San Francisco, Promise, Indiana, and the Harold Alfond College Challenge in Maine. Dr. Elliott is a professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. He is the founding director of the Center on Assets, Education, and Inclusion, and a leading, again, researcher in the fields of children's savings accounts, student debt, and wealth inequality. Thank you guys so much for being here. So excited to jump into the conversation, but first let's root this in the who this is for, why we're investing in this, and why it's so important. So Leila is going to share with us some videos about New York.
Great, thank you, Kim. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen for a moment.
I have two kids in this program in Kids Rise, first grade and third grader. And the third grader, he knows that I participated to this program for him. This is his money for his college. He told me that I know that this is my money. This program is good for me because I told him this is for you. You're gonna have them in your college. So you don't have to worry a little bit. Sometimes we log in to see how much is his money is going up or down in the fund. So it's a big opportunity. That's why I feel like all the families should apply for this program because it's so good.
How have I participated? I think in every step of the way. From the moment of its conception, it has been a part of me. It's part of my PC life. One of my favorites was April showers, raining money, April showers. So we had dollar bills and everyone received a piggy bank, or they received a little planter that looks like a rain boot. And it was about it's raining money, it's raining savings. We always have an art component for the child. So while that child is creating their artwork, that parent is on the other side and they're logging in. So we encompass the whole family. That's what we try to do.
We came up with the idea to increase the counts of the children in Astoria houses. And we came up with $1,000. We wanted to put $1,000 in each one of those 134 children's accounts. And on the steps of faith, we launched it. And we launched it under the Astoria Tennis Association. And it's just been amazing. We put in place for them at an early age, and they will know that there are funds and the accounts are being built. So that'll give them the strength and the courage to make good decisions as far as their future is concerned in education.
If we look at where the racial wealth gap is right now in this country, the reality is there is a 10-to-1 racial wealth gap. 10-to-1 gap between Black families and white families. And that's not because one family's worked 10 times harder, it's because we've had structural challenges in both the creation of wealth and the keeping of wealth. And so if we can come up with universal wealth building tools and start it early and be deliberate and know that every single child is going to have assets that they can grow and that are going to mature and that can really provide resources for them to have long, sustainable, and effective lives, we know we're going to make a fundamental dent in that. And I love the fact that this is already attacking and addressing one of the most diverse school districts in the city of New York. When you're looking at the work that's taking place in Queens, this is a place that speaks multiple languages, comes from multiple cultures. It is a true mosaic and a true representation of what makes New York so special. What better place to start a platform that's looking at universal wealth building than there?
Who knew that Governor Moore was going to make make an appearance. Great to hear from you. So we just saw engaged parents, we saw community support, and we saw at the end, Governor Moore talking about closing the racial wealth gap. So let me open it up and ask our panelists, why is investing in children, particularly this type of strategy, a long-term strategy, so important for closing the racial wealth gap?
I guess I can jump in first. And I do want to mention that we're going to put somewhere in the chat or in the post email to you a link to a report that we wrote recently that talks about this in much more depth. It also contains 4 case studies of programs doing different things to build wealth in them. So one of the things about a CSA that or a child trust account is that it puts a structure in place, institutional structure, financial structure for families, for the community to begin to build wealth for kids long term, right? And the thing of it is a practical way of thinking about it is if you have someone who's, a young adult, they come out and they delay putting money into a 401k plan. Yeah, I should have turned my phone off, huh? Into a 401k plan, they're going to have far less wealth than someone who started 5 years earlier. In this case, when we're trying to solve the wealth gap and help families build wealth, if you can start a kid off from kindergarten or even earlier, building wealth in those accounts, by the time they reach 18, in this case, they're putting in $13,000. But don't think of it just as in the kid getting $13,000, but think of it as, in the case you'll hear from New York, is how we even saw in that example where the one community was able to get an additional $1,000 to put into those accounts. So once this infrastructure is in place, it's not just about what the foundation puts into those accounts, but then you have the opportunity to build wealth from a multitude of different streams into these accounts. And that's why it's so vitally important. Lastly, and I'll stop here, is, wealthy families do this from an early age, right? Not only are their own families putting money into accounts, the grandparents begin to save for them. They have all these different avenues that wealth is being put aside for their kids. And poor kids don't get that. These accounts provide a structure to begin to mimic what these wealthier families do, but for low-income kids, and importantly, in a mainstream infrastructure, right? And so we're not saying, here's a separate thing for you. We're saying we're going to build this scaffolding around mainstream financial institutions that help you understand how to interact with them, why they're important, build up a trust with them. So when you leave and get that money, you're in a better position to leverage those assets and use them for your own benefit. We can talk more about this, I'm sure we will, but I want to give a quick answer.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, it's not just about having an asset accumulate and be able to, gain on that early investment from an early age. It's also about kind of the narratives that a kid is hearing from a very early age, and those expectations of success and expectations and support to meet those expectations, receiving that from a very early age. We hear messages about ourselves from a very early age, about our communities from a very early age. So part of what we've tried to build is not just this vehicle for asset accumulation, but engaging the entire ecosystem that impacts the long-term success of a child, knowing that each part of that ecosystem, whether it's positive or benefit, does impact a child's kind of economic opportunities in the future. There's a lot of research that suggests that economic mobility and closing the racial wealth gap is not just about assets. It's very much about assets, but it's also about social capital, a sense of belonging in one's community. So we're trying to kind of bring that holistic approach of economic mobility to this work.
I should jump back because Leila brings up some things that maybe I should have jumped into as well. That maybe she didn't quite jump in all the way either. Is that, and there's a fair amount of research at this point on some of these topics, whether they be randomized control trials or quasi-experimental designs. But we have a fair amount of evidence suggesting that these programs not only, and I think it's really important to emphasize that you'll have this infrastructure in place for the community to contribute and build, but then also it's building, like Leila, it's more to being successful in the end than just having the money. And so it builds families, kids, social emotional development. So they're more able to regulate themselves and participate in school and do the other kinds of activities that are going to be necessary long-term for them to be able to take advantage of that wealth. It helps parents have positive expectations for their kids. And I usually talk about positive expectations like tangible hope. Like when you give a kid an asset, you're allowing them to begin to purchase some part of their future self. That makes sense to you, right? I mean, it's a very valuable thing. It's like, it's really concrete in that way. It's not just, I hope one day to go to college, but I'm actually, or buy a home or start a business or whatever that thing might be, is I'm actually building assets that allow me to begin to plan for my future in a way that I've never been able to before. It's what I call tangible hope. And there's a lot of evidence around building children's expectations, parents' expectations. I mean, there's a number of other indirect effects or asset effects, we call them, that occur because kids grow up with wealth. And I think that's something that's sometimes undervalued in like baby bond programs and stuff, because it's not just the money. It's about also making sure that once they get that money, that they're in a position to really take advantage and leverage that money to build additional assets. Because even if we have the whole community contribute and build assets, we're not going to give them enough money that they can retire, right? They're going to have to work and be productive citizens and be able to use the assets that they have to build additional assets. And so that's really important.
Yeah. I'll just add one more thing on that, since Kim, you framed it as a question about the racial wealth gap, is that obviously, and we all know this, that the racial wealth gap did not come about accidentally. It's the result of a lot of systemic racism and institutional challenges. So we have to have these intentional investments, intentional programs that try to take it head on. We're not going to solve it passively. So.
Thank you for that. And like you said, these systems have been built over time, which is why some of these interventions, specifically what we're talking about today, also need to be over time. Leila, we saw the videos, but take us through NYC Kids Rise. Talk about the program.
Sure. So we like to call ourselves a universal wealth building platform. It's community driven in that we've kind of created this infrastructure, as Willie just talked about, for different parts of a child's community to plug in. The broad strokes of the program itself, though, is it started as a pilot in one school district in New York City. It was School District 30, of about 3,500 kindergarteners a year. Now we're in our second year of citywide expansion. The program was taken to scale after the successful pilot. So now what it means to be a kindergartner in New York City is that you will automatically receive an NYC scholarship account with an initial $100 investment from NYC Kids Rise and opportunities to earn up to $200 more in rewards. Of course, families can opt out. The opt-out piece of this is important. It's automatic, so there's not a burdensome application process, but families have an opportunity to opt out. So there's the initial investment that we make into an NYC scholarship account, which is invested in the New York 529 program. I can talk more about that later. Families then have an opportunity to open their own savings account and connect it to their child's scholarship account through this online platform savings tracker that we have. So we sometimes talk about this as both a scholarship and a savings program. It's because of that dual account structure. And then another critical piece to this, which Willie hit on, and Ms. Claudia Koger, a tenant association leader who you just saw in the video, helped with one of these. We have something we call community scholarships as an important part of this platform, which means that we are working with communities, with anchor institutions, with the city, with larger institutional partners to drive more resources into the accounts of students from historically disadvantaged communities or communities that have been historically excluded from wealth building opportunities. So there's kind of the universal scholarship account that everyone receives. There's the family savings component of encouraging and working with families to connect and their own savings account and to save alongside it. And then there's the community scholarship aspect where we're trying to drive more assets into student accounts. There's more to the platform as well. We have financial curriculum extensions we work on with the Department of Education. Again, this is a partnership now with the Department of Education and the City of New York. These big institutional partners are a really important part of this. So students receive some financial education in the classroom that's connected to the account. We also have workshops for families. And through working with the schools, we do a lot of work with the now 1,000+ schools across the New York City school system. So those are some of the key components of what we've built here. Again, we're in our second year of citywide expansion, which means we've had 2 kindergarten cohorts come through so far. Next year, we'll have our third group of kindergartners. And pretty soon, within a few years, every elementary school student in the New York City public school system will have access to this platform.
That is awesome. And you have said a lot, and I loved it was taken to scale after the successful pilot. Let's all put that into the air. Successful pilots lead to scale. Now, in New York, it is universal, but you also do specific targets for deeper asset accumulation, correct? Okay, and then could you talk about that and why you have the specific targets and what you're doing there?
Yeah, so it is a universal program, similar, we want this to be seen, we want this to not be seen as some kind of stigmatizing program on the side that only some families need. We know that all families need tools to build wealth. And similar to how we have universal pre-K now in New York City, and that everyone needs public school education, we think everyone needs access to wealth building tools. So the kind of universality of this is important. Of course, the piece of the platform that's about driving more assets into the accounts, the community scholarships, that actually depends on whole communities being part of this program. And it depends on the whole city kind of coming together around students within their neighborhoods, across neighborhoods. So we want families of all income levels to be part of this platform, partly for that reason. But in addition, yes, so we have in all of our community scholarships, we're driving them into groups of student accounts that are from neighborhoods, because as we know, right now it still is very easy across our country to kind of determine economic status based on someone's zip code. So we're able to kind of identify neighborhoods, school communities, public housing communities where we've been working to drive even additional assets. Again, these tend to be communities that have been historically excluded from wealth building opportunities, communities of color, lower income communities. So we're working very closely to kind of drive additional assets into student accounts who need it most.
Thank you. And Willie, I mean, you've been doing work all over the country. Could you maybe highlight some of the programs that you've been involved in?
Specifically on how they're targeting and building assets in it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and so again, I would just because maybe it sounds like an advertisement, but I'm really not trying to advertise. I think it'd be just very useful for the audience is to look at some of the case studies that we have done here recently, because I think that'd be really useful. So I'll mention some about those. One would be like Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a statewide CSA program. And one of the things they did was in part of it's based upon anytime you do an automatic enrollment type of program, there are going to be certain data points that you have that allow you to open up the accounts for everyone. And some of the data points they have automatically is birth records, first of all, because how they assign all the accounts is through their birth records, but they also have WIC information. And what they decided to do was put a targeted deposit into accounts for all WIC families in Pennsylvania. And so that is one way in which money has been specifically targeted for a low income group. Now we're talking about much smaller amounts of money, like $25 into those accounts, $50, 25 or 50, I forget exactly. That's going into the accounts for the WIC families. In Indiana, in a program called Early Award Scholarship Program, used to be called Promise Indiana, Promise Scholarship. They are kind of rethinking how they think about scholarships. And so you have the Promise movement, which is a promise of scholarships in the future. You have the traditional scholarships where they get the money when they graduate. In early award scholarships, when you take a portion of that scholarship money and you put it into their children's savings account early on. And they've started doing that, both as a community foundation has started doing that, putting some of that scholarship money into the accounts early on. The kids can't touch it, they can't use it, but they grow up with it, right? So they have that asset, they see it grow, and it gets a chance to be a part of that community pot of money right? What I mean by that is the many streams of assets that are coming in, it's all kind of put together and grows together. It can be far more than what it would have been if they just received a traditional scholarship. And beyond that, you begin to affecting the kids' life early on. And so they have done that. One of a funder provided a cohort of kids with an additional $1,000 into their accounts. Instead of doing a traditional scholarship, they decided to do an early award scholarship and put it into their account early on. But again, targeted in this case to two grade levels, right? And so that's another way, thinking about scholarships and transfer them early on, and sometimes target them by communities. In St. Paul, Minnesota, we are actually doing a randomized control trial there, and they are doing kind of what you're talking about here. They already have a citywide CSA program, Children's Savings Account program, where everybody gets an account. And they have, in this randomized control trials, families are getting guaranteed income. I'm sure many of you have heard of the guaranteed income program for low income. All the families have a CSA, and among the low income families, they can be put into this group that gets guaranteed income, but they also have a group that gets an additional $1,000 into their account, and that's hopefully going to go on like your program for years to come. And so it's the same kind of idea there. And we are doing an RCT on that. So we'll start having data in the fall, which might be useful to you and your program as well, as that data comes in. And some groups get both. Some groups get both the guaranteed income and that, and trying to combine these programs. And that's one of the interesting things about CSAs, is that you can begin to target funding for different groups. And communities can participate and put money into those groups. But then also you can think about how it connects income and asset streams. Like, how can we put them into the same program? So we're all thinking about how this leverages and moves the kids towards building wealth, right? I mean, and I'll cut this off, but I'll say one more quick thing because I'm a nerd and I have to, is that when you think about poverty, we oftentimes focus on income, but really income is dealing with kind of the symptoms of poverty as opposed to the root cause of poverty. Now, anyone, you have sinus problems right now, Kim, right? You'll take pretty much any pill you can find to get rid of those symptoms. So let's not mitigate getting rid of the symptoms. And that also affects your performance right now, right? Based upon whether you can medicate or treat those symptoms. So treating homelessness, treating hunger, treating all these things is very important for people to function on a daily basis, but it's insufficient, right? Because in the end of the day, what we have is an opportunity problem, right? And what poor people have is not simply low income. What they have is an opportunity problem. What assets do, these programs do, is allow us to provide them with wealth that provides them with opportunities to really reach their full potential. And so we can't just address or think about poverty as an income problem. It's also really about assets and providing kids with a future. And these programs help address that.
Right. Thank you. And yes, I was complaining earlier about how the pollen is taking me out. So anybody who's logged on from the DC area, I think you can understand. The link that Dr. Elliott mentioned is in the chat now. So please make sure that you save that. So let me ask, we saw a little bit in the video that we had parents who were very excited to take part. Well, what was it like in the pilot stage and launching things? Were everyone excited? Were people hesitant? You know, what happened on the front end, Leila?
Yeah, and I see a question here that I can also hit on while speaking to this. The pilot started, really kicked off in late 2017. It was funded privately by predominantly through private philanthropy. The Gray Foundation have been really steadfast, incredible partners from day one. They funded most of the first 5 years of the pilot up until citywide expansion. They're still strong partners in the program, and really we would not be here, this whole platform would not be here without their support. Of course, there were other philanthropy and other funders engaged in community scholarships, and in other aspects of the pilot, like our engagement with community-based organizations. We ran a whole little program testing different ways for community-based organizations to integrate this program into their services. That was funded through City Community Capital. But yes, the pilot, just to answer one of the questions I saw pop up there, was funded through private philanthropy before the city came on board to support with scale. It's always been a partnership with the city and the Department of Education, but there was no funding relationship until going to scale with the city. So in terms of family engagement, so in the pilot, 95% of eligible families participated. So we did have about 5% that did opt out. We never receive information from those families. Part of what they're doing when they opt out is saying, I don't actually want my information shared with NYC Kids Rise. So we don't learn that much about them. We do learn, though, from some families who accidentally opted out or opted out initially because they were skeptical. It's like too good to be true. There's some of that, understandably, in some communities, a distrust of government at times. That once they kind of learned about it, and importantly, learned about it through trusted partners in their school community. Again, our partnership with the Department of Education, where families are first learning about what this is, not from NYC Kids Rise, but from their child's school. So their initial education is coming from their school about what this is, what the opportunity is, and whether or not that opportunity to opt out happens with their school. So they're hearing about it through trusted partners. We definitely received a lot of excitement. I mean, as you saw in that video, it really does reflect this sense of wonderment from a lot of families of like, is this really real? What's the catch? And then once people learn what it is, really wanting to dig in more and engage. So a lot of excitement. One of the things that we'll be building out further too is just how to harness that excitement for families to really organize themselves too. In the pilot, we saw some of this. We did town halls with families, sharing of information. Families often will go to other families to learn about whether or not a program is trustworthy. So again, learning about it through their schools was very helpful. Learning about it through community-based organizations that they already go to for different social services. That was an important part of testing in the pilot for us, is how to work closely with these community-based organizations that, again, are already working with families. Going through that existing social infrastructure, that's kind of what we call it in the program, has been really an important learning and an important aspect of how it was built.
That's great. And because I know that the Greater Washington Community Foundation's program is working directly with the school system and trusted community partners. That sounds like that's really been helpful for your programs. So there's a lot of data and research findings and analysis that's out there about these programs. If we had 2-3 big takeaways, what would you say that the data and the research or the analysis is saying, Willie? And then Leila, similarly to you, for the data that you're getting quantitatively, hearing from the partners, hearing from communities, what are the 2-3 big takeaways that you're hearing? So Willie, I'll start with you.
Sorry, I was unmuting. I was typing an answer in the answer thing. So we're looking at the 3 major data points that we're learning from the programs, correct?
Yeah, I mean, just the things that you want the audience to really walk away with. You're seeing this all across the country. Why are they so successful? What is the analysis? What is the data really showing us?
All right, before I get to that point exactly, I would tell people it is a belief that it's possible, right? Like a program like this is possible. And I think the more programs we get, the more a sense comes about people that it is possible. And I'm telling you, we have I work with federal legislators and everybody else on these issues. And one of the biggest issues that communities and legislators and people have is, it's like, we can do this, like that it's doable. That's a huge hurdle. And now what we're trying to get across is many of the CSA programs have been small dollar programs. And what I mean by that is the initial deposits have been relatively small, anywhere from $5 to $1,000, right? The idea that we can put more money in these accounts is beginning to be a reality, that we can start off with large initial deposits is becoming a reality. But again, I think your program will be a great marker, not only for Washington, D.C., but for the country to understand that we can make a large investment in these accounts over time. And that's really important. I can't underscore to you how much of the effort is just to make people believe that we can go to the moon when it comes to our kids. And we really don't believe that we can do that. Secondly, to more specific to actual data, I think that the findings we have around children's expectations and parents' expectations have been instrumental in these programs developing, growing, and why they start, right? And it's consistent. We've seen this evidence across randomized controlled trials, across different programs, different locations. These programs instill in people a sense that college is possible, not in some wishful kind of way, but in a tangible kind of way. And so I think that's been instrumental in the program's success. I think I'll give you a different kind of data point, and it goes to one of the questions that I saw in the thing. It's around saving, and our families contribute. These conversations oftentimes come down to whether or not low-income people are saving in the accounts. And we have evidence that shows that poor people do and can save in these accounts. But understand, they're very sensitive to pandemics, to high inflation, to flat tires, to everything else in life. So we can't understand saving in these accounts in the same way that we understand them for middle class and wealthy families. It's going to be inconsistent. It's going to be lower amounts of money. The point of them saving is not so much for them to save the way out of poverty. That's not going to happen. And that's why we have to put meaningful amounts of money into these accounts. That's why we have to understand that we need the community to participate. And these are community accounts, even though they're in individual kids' names for everybody to participate in, because they're going to save small amounts of money inconsistently over time. But that is money that they're saving, and the idea that they've contributed is so much more value than a dollar amount, right? In the fact that they're in a mainstream institution, building those connections with it, learning finance, they can, now just think about it. When every kid in your community has an account, your teacher can walk into that schoolroom and talk to them about that account, talk to them about their future, think about their future differently for the child, right? There's this thing called low expectations among teachers for certain children. We can begin to shape those things. This is the power of having these accounts in place, and some of what the data is beginning to show. And quite frankly, in all our data points, particularly in the randomized controlled trials and stuff, they come out of programs like Oklahoma C2K, which is 2,000 kids across the state, right? Very much different than you saturating every kid in your community with an account. That makes for poor research, to be honest, because then we don't have a comparison group. And that's why we do randomized controlled trials and give it to a smaller number of people. But it doesn't allow for this effect to happen where you begin to change the culture around not only going to college, but what's expected of our kids, how they launch into their futures, whether or not they leave college or leave post-secondary education or leave high school with assets and what that means for their future, right? Changing all of that larger mindset that really has led to the first thing I talked to about, which is the lack of belief that we can actually do anything anymore, right? One of the things, and I'll stop here, is one of the reasons you don't see as much savings as you could see is because there's a culture around saving that is poor in America for everyone. And then specifically, if we're talking about college, a lot of people don't start planning or thinking about college until the kids are in college, right? They start thinking we'll save then. And so these programs are trying to change that mindset. And we see evidence that over time in programs, the longer the program is in existence, the longer people are in the programs, the more that mindset changes. And so what you're trying to do is change the whole cultural belief around when we start saving for college, when we start planning for college, when we start thinking about our kids' futures and building wealth for those futures. and that takes time. And so we shouldn't expect that we throw these programs in place and all of a sudden a bunch of people start saving it, right? We're trying to change minds in cultures around saving and building assets. And then understanding that in the end, it's still going to be a community effort to get these to really change wealth inequality.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with what Willie said more. I mean, the just starting with where he just ended, people really need to be comfortable that these are long-term programs, right? You're not going to be seeing behavior change in 2 years necessarily, or even 3 years, right? We have long-term goals with this, but there are some indicators along the way that we can look at, and I also fully agree with this idea that the fact that these programs exist and that a family or a child now has one of these accounts is itself a major indicator of success that should be celebrated when these things kick off and launch. So just kind of the number of students that have access to one of these accounts becomes itself an indicator. In New York, for example, before our program, in many neighborhoods, you saw vast differences in family access to 529s, whereas in a higher income, up to 1 in 4 students in a classroom in a higher income neighborhood had access to had a 529 account. But in some neighborhoods, you'd have to look at 91 families to find one student that had a 529 account. So just access to these wealth building tools itself becomes, I think, a major indicator of success. We also, for us, we're paying very close attention to and really trying to move the needle on who's actually logging in and looking at their account for the very first time, right? It's one thing to have this platform and provide this resource that is meant to be, but to kind of build on the foundation of providing this access, families need to know they have it, and the kids need to know that it's there for them as well. So we do a lot of work to make sure families actually take that first step to know they have it, log in, see the account, see the value in the account, show that to your child, start talking about it at home and in school. So we do look at some of the kind of engagement data points with the platform itself, and we are not, a lot of people want to look at how much our family's saving on their own, but again, I fully agree with Willie that can't be the focus of these kinds of efforts, knowing the challenges so many low-income families face. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great. And so I know that folks are hearing 529, which are college savings plans. We've heard a lot about references to college. The Greater Washington Community Foundation program, the allowable uses are more than education and training. It's also home ownership, entrepreneurship, savings. Thoughts about that? I know, again, a lot of the data and research that we have are tied to the earlier programs, which again are mostly linked to education.
Yeah,
Leila, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry. I'll be quick. Yeah, and so I'll just say originally the idea was for them to be for more purposes, but politically it was much more feasible when think about it. We couldn't talk about free college 10 years ago. We couldn't talk about baby bonds 10 years ago, right? I mean, and so when these things started, there wasn't much of an appetite for the broader usages. I do think that has shifted, right? With largely, and I give baby bonds a lot of credit for this, that the push on baby bonds has made people think more about wealth inequality in really thinking about how these platforms can be used to tackle that, which is a much broader spectrum, right? And just I think college debt has done a lot to open up this conversation too, because it has really made people question the value of college, probably in unhealthy ways, to be honest. But it has made them, and I say college, when I say college, I mean post-secondary education at large, right? Is people really to begin to question and think about the value of some of those things. So I think it's great that you're expanding the usage. I think when we talked earlier, I said that's one of the things you should do. I can tell you that there's some federal legislation coming out around CSAs soon, a proposal coming out soon that looks at the broader usages, using a large dollar CSA and looking at broader usages. That's where we should go. And eventually we should get to the place that it's not just about launching kids into adulthood, but these accounts live with the kids throughout their lives, right? And so, because there's different points at which kids need access. We think about college, but one of the reasons college is not the great return on a degree as it used to be, particularly when you compare low-income kids and high-income kids to get a degree, is because of how they come out of college. They don't have an asset store to allow them to make a purchase of a house early on, start investing in their 401k. All these things mean that later down, they're going to take longer to launch, longer to meet median income, and I got research evidence on that at a later age. And so, yeah, I think it's great that you're broadening usage, and eventually we'll make these lifelong accounts, child development accounts that expand throughout their lifetime, where we can constantly have this structure in place where we can build assets for low-income families.
Yeah, I also think it's great that you're broadening the use. I think that's really important to kind of hand over that power and autonomy to the students and families, as much flexibility as possible. And like Lily said, I mean, a lot of programs, and ours included, the 529s that we invest in our program, that's an existing infrastructure that was there. You know, there's different versions of this that could have taken place, but it's an existing infrastructure that we are able to leverage to be able to do the pilot and build from there. And we're paying close attention to changes and proposed changes, even to the 529 program nationally, to make it more flexible. Part of our work, as well as we actually do advocate for policy to make 529s more inclusive and accessible for lower income families. It hasn't traditionally been a very accessible tool. That's part of all of this work, as well as making, not just providing access to wealth building tools, but making them easier to access and work better for low income families, diverse families. Language access, for example, is a major issue when it comes to financial tools and instruments, including the New York 529 program. So I think the flexible uses is great. Our program is in the 529, but we're going to be watching some of the kind of policy conversation about even making, you know, there's proposals out there about allowing 529s to roll over into retirement accounts, or just allowing even more flexible uses that we're interested in. So
the federal proposal I'm talking about does some of that. So, so I think we'll see some of this in the near future.
And part of why we're seeing those changes is because they're lessons learned, right? People go through it, we learn, we make changes. So let me ask you guys that. For the programs that you've led and been involved in, what are the lessons learned? Are there any changes that you're making or thinking about making? Leila, we'll start with you. I saw that smile.
Yeah.
You're like, yes, we've learned.
I mean, lessons, I think patience remains a lesson that we're constantly learning. You know, these are, again, as I said earlier, these are long-term kind of legacy changing programs, I think, that can have major impacts on institutions and on people's lives. And that change isn't going to happen overnight. And so I think one lesson, you know, I was smiling because we're really only 2 years into citywide expansion. So we're learning a lot and iterating as we go, but we also have a lot to learn. And we also, of course, stand on the shoulders of so many others, including Lily, who have been at this for so long. And the whole industry, I think, has been growing a lot and learning a lot. But for us, yeah, I think this plugging into, you know, taking the private sector, playing a big role in piloting something, the institutional partners and the government partners coming on board at the right time to take something to scale. You know, we work very closely with the Mayor's Office of Equity here. The Task Force for Racial Inclusion and Equity is who actually really helped take this program to scale. So those institutional partners, so that you as a program and don't have to be a, you know, 300-person organization to do this work, that you can plug into and leverage existing institutional partners to do the type of scale that matters for this, has been a really important lesson and part of our model. And then continuing to find ways to allow programs like this to continue to be flexible and iterate, I think, as we learn more, since it is still pretty nascent, how you make something both universal, but then allow communities to adapt it and use it in the way that works best for them, is something we're eager to continue to learning about.
Yeah, I would say, I wanted to go back to, I don't think it's kind of a lesson learned about expanding the usage of CSAs. that's not why we're starting to expand them. I think the lesson learned in that respect is more about what it takes to change narratives around things to allow, because I mean, Sherrod in the very beginning, when he proposed CSAs, child trust accounts, even if you think about UK, United Kingdom, and their child trust fund, it had these expanded uses. I mean, this idea is not new. It's just that we didn't have favorable conditions for people to accept that. They weren't in a position where they could believe that we could give poor people those kinds of opportunities. They could understand doing things for poor people around education, but they thought they might be abusive if we just gave them money to do anything. Quite frankly, right? These are these narratives that exist. And so it was getting people to a point of where they could understand, appreciate, and recognize that low-income people can take advantage of these opportunities in productive ways. And I don't know that we're fully there yet, to be frank. Maybe some communities are, but I think when you start thinking conservative, liberal, and all these things, and different groups who are at different points, not everybody's at the same point with that. They still think that if you give poor people money, they're going to spend it, and they're going to spend it on steaks and everything else, right? They're not going to do the right thing. So anyhow, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know so much as a lesson learned, because we always wanted to do that, but it just wasn't feasible. But I think that is a lesson learned, is that even around saving, people will try to make these programs solely about the saving piece. And it's hard, because I don't want to undervalue that, because it's very important that we learn and understand on how to get families to contribute, right? Because just even if you contribute a small amount of money, you feel as though it's your money. You've done something, and you think about it. There's evidence of this within sociology and other areas, that when people make their own contributions, it really adds a lot of value. And we're trying to teach them long-term habits, if you will. Put them in, I don't know if teach them is the right word, but expose them to, so they can develop these ideas that saving is important. Another lesson is, and one I don't think we fully learned that, but I'm just starting to see in some data. I look at a lot of savings data from a lot of different programs across the country. And when it comes to saving, I think we have quite a bit to learn on why and when people save and what motivates them to save. So I think there's a whole lot of lessons yet to be learned there. But the lesson that I've gathered from it is engagement looks different. Because what we want to do is, when we have a savings account, is think about it. We always want to define engagement by whether someone's saving, even whether someone's logging in. We have seen in the data is that families begin talking about college. They might not even be saving, but now they're having conversations about their kids' futures. I'm saying college, but you can think about that if you had a broader program. You would expect it to be much broader. Maybe it's about starting a business, maybe it's about buying a home, or whatever it is, but you're starting to have these active conversations at a very young age in again, a tangible way. Now you're not just, one quick example, and I've used this before, like if I was homeless and blah, 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 and me and my mother would go to neighborhoods and we'd look for a house. And we would look for a house. We dream about living in houses, right? But it was wishful. It didn't change our behavior or anything else, because it just helps us get through a day. But when you have a little down payment, like you're starting to save for a down payment, and you go look at those houses, man, everything becomes much more clear for you. Now the people selling you a house think about you differently because you have money, or they think you have money, you're preparing for it. You begin to define where you can live much more clearly for yourself. It all becomes much more clear. Your future takes on a realistic aspect. And that's what that's one of the lessons that we've learned that I think is so powerful and so important with these accounts, is that you're bringing the future into sight for kids and families in a way that you couldn't otherwise.
I love it. I cannot believe we're already at time. I'm glad that folks had an opportunity to submit questions, which were being answered real time. But this entire panel, so fantastic. We can go to the moon for our kids. I love that. It's multi-generational. It takes community. It takes trust and time. It can change the narrative and policy. And it's this tangible opportunity, as both Leila and Willie have put so eloquently, and the fact that it's possible. So thank you again. Let's go big. And real quick, let me hand it back to Anna to close us out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elliott and Leila, for this incredible and inspiring conversation. And thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. We're going to follow this up by sending some reading materials on children's trust accounts, as well as recording of the webinar. We would encourage you to share this with friends and colleagues and others who are interested in learning more about the concept of children's trust accounts and how it can really help children and our whole community to thrive. We're looking forward to keeping you updated on our work and sharing additional opportunities for you to learn about this and other ways to increase economic mobility for marginalized communities across the region. You can expect to hear more from us soon. And again, thank you for joining us.